Your favorite.
So let me know. Good evening and welcome to the special meeting of the Common Council Finance and Claims Committee for today, Thursday, February 15th at 7:30 p.m. We will start with the roll call of Finance Committee members. Councilmember Jim Breyer.
Here.
Councilmember Johan Lopez.
Present.
Councilmember Doug Sutton.
Present.
Councilmember Heather Dunn. Councilmember Dewan Wiggins. Councilmember Melissa Murray. And Councilmember Greg Burnett. So we have a quorum and we'll identify if either Councilmember Wiggins or Murray joins the meeting. With the roll call completed, we'll move right into the agenda items. Items 3, 4, and 5 relate to our tax collector. So I will turn it over to Lisa B. for update on our Claims Committee report, tax narrative, and monthly tax collectors report.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This month, there are no special requests for the claims. So the claims report, the list of refunds is for informational purposes only. And with your permission, I can skip forward to the narrative and the end of January report, unless you have any questions about the claims.
I think we're all set.
Okay. The end of January was a good month for us. We went through the first 7 months of the fiscal year. And as of the end of January, we were at 91.6% of the tax levy, 93.26% of the sewer use levy. Our collection period extended into the month of February because February 1st was the last day to pay. So consequently, even though we're looking pretty good in January, we're very, very slightly ahead of where we were last year. We won't really know where we stand until we compare through the end of February, because we did take in a lot of timely payments the first week of February that were postmarked or made on February 1st and processed February 1st or subsequent. The collection period went fairly well. There were no major issues. What we're working on now primarily, in addition to getting ready to send out past due notices, is our tax sale. And since the last report, we've started getting some of our title searches back in. We've collected more than $900,000 on the tax sale properties just since November with that first set of letters going out. We need to regroup now and see what happened with the second installment payment of this grand list and see what other properties might be included in the sale. So we'll be doing that analysis probably the rest of this month. We hope to send past due notices out the first week of March, perhaps, and file our liens later in the month of March, and then move forward into the spring on more enforcement activities. Still working with the health department on the health permits. We had a wage garnishment. We'll be sending the marshal out for some business personal property, but right now kind of cleaning up after the collection, dealing with some customer service issues and things like that. And of course, looking forward to the budget season and trying to do some estimates for the finance department on what our collections will be going into the next fiscal year. But I'm glad to answer any questions that you may have. I tried to include a little bit more information on what a tax sale is in this month's narrative, because we haven't had one in 3 years. Our last one was in 2021, right after COVID. So just to give a little bit more detail on how it actually works and why we do it. But I'm perfectly glad to answer any questions that any of you have.
Do we have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Lopez.
Thank you so much. I have a quick question. Does the delay in assessing the collection rate into the end of February have any negative impacts on financial planning or reporting?
Well, it's like that every year because the last day to pay is February 1st, so we're aware of it. It doesn't affect anything at all. It's just we're used to it. The way that the tax system works is they are given a month's grace. So even though the bill is due January 1st, they have until February 1st. And just because of the way our system works with the processing, a lot of people pay in person at bank branches. We have to go and retrieve those payments and post them. So we might not post those payments until later in February. The same thing really happens over the summer when we do the summer billing. August 1st is the last day, but a lot of payments come in on August 1st and slightly thereafter. So we don't really know where we stand until at the end of August. But if you look at the comparison year to date from this year to prior January, we're right where we need to be. And that's usually how it goes. Our taxpayers are actually pretty good and our collections are pretty stable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a few more.
Hmm?
I have a few more questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
So just a quick follow-up, just in reading your narrative. In terms of the transfer payments, I mean, are there any potential long-term consequences in realigning the transfer payments from previous year's taxes to meet the current tax obligations, especially given like the ongoing tax appeal cases?
Well, what happens is when we had the 2018 revaluation and many of our taxpayers did not find satisfaction with the Board of Assessment Appeals, so they took the cases to the Superior Court. And those cases are adjudicated over a time period. And usually it takes, in some cases, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years for those cases to become adjudicated. Once they are adjudicated, in many of the cases, those taxpayers have made payments. And now the court is saying, we think that your assessments were too high. So the city needs to basically refund or credit those taxpayers who in good faith made their payments while their appeals were pending litigation. So we have to honor the verdict of the court. The problem is we've already collected that money from prior years. So what happens is it basically erodes our delinquent collections because we've already taken that money in prior years. And now it's our current fiscal year, we have to give that money back. So that you see that with our prior collections, but you also see it in our current levy. So that's part of why we have that change to the current levy in the end of January report. In the column that is the second from the far right, it says change in levy. You can see that our levy went down. Now, some of it went down for motor vehicle reasons, but the bulk of it went down if you see real estate. $2.3 million. Those were changes to properties on the current grant list. So that was money that, had to go back to the taxpayers that we had already collected, basically, because the figures that we're reporting to you every month are real-time figures. They're net of refunds, they're net of changes, they're net of credits. And as I understand it, the finance department does budget for this. They call it erosion. In collections, and they plan for it and they budget for it, particularly going into a reval. They know that there's going to be court appeals and they know that we're going to have to be giving money back over time. So I don't know if the CFO wants to weigh in on that, but they do plan for it.
Got it.
I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. Thanks. And just one last question is, just a general question. Are there any strategies that can be implemented to mitigate like the impacts that the stipulated judgments have on the adjusted levy?
I don't know that we can. The tax collector's office is not really involved in any of the litigation. It's the law department, the office of the corporation counsel, and the assessor's office. Probably the way to mitigate it would be to have more accurate assessments to begin with, that people don't appeal and win. But that is the goal of Reval and the assessor's office, and they're trying the best they can. But it's not something, I wouldn't know how to really do anything about that. I apologize. That's not a good answer.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's fair enough. That's okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jack.
Great. Any additional questions? Okay, very good. And Lisa was smiling because you have guests behind you who have been
Distracted.
hogging
Uh-oh.
Two of
the
them.
screen.
That's my big one.
Yeah.
They like Zoom. They like Zoom.
Yeah. Great.
As long as-
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Numbers are heading in the right direction, and as you stated, we'll know better what our posture is after February, when all of the second warrant payments were due. We'll know
Yes.
exactly where we are going into the fourth quarter.
Correct.
Great. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. See you next month.
Yes, thank you. Moving on to item 6 on the agenda, which is an update from the tax assessor on the reval process. So over to our interim tax assessor, Paul Gorman.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Since I last spoke to you last month, not a lot has changed because at that point we were just finishing up all of the informal hearing information being entered into the system. And where we're at now is we provided finance with some grand list numbers, as I think were presented on a couple of occasions this week, including this earlier this evening. And right now we're just in the final stages of dotting the i's, crossing the t's, making sure that everything is accurate, that we don't have any mistakes before we go to the final step of signing the grand list by the end of next week and submitting it to the state. And then the next step after that is that March 1st begins the application period for the Board of Assessment Appeals. That closes at 4:30 on March 20th. If you come on March 21st, unfortunately, by state law, we cannot accept your application for the Board of Assessment Appeals. So please make sure that everybody knows it has to be by March 20th at 4:30 p.m. And then the hearings, the dates have not been set yet. We're waiting for the Board of Assessment Appeals to get us the dates in April, but they are setting aside a numerous amount of days to make themselves available to hear the appeals of the residents and the commercial entities in the town.
Okay, any questions? The one question I have, this being a fiscal revaluation year, did you see the number of meetings? Was it in line with what we expected, or was it a higher amount, or?
Oh, well, the informals, which aren't something that's done every year, so there's nothing to be able to compare to, but the percentage that was that were booked was around 4.5% for residential, and that's about what Vision was expecting. They were hoping to be under 4, but they were expecting right around 4, and that's what we received. I think the commercial was a little bit lighter than John Valente was expecting. It was 112, I believe, was the number, and that's out of over 2,000 accounts. So I was quite honestly expecting the rate to be higher there, but it wasn't. But again, and this goes back to Mr. Lopez's question from before, I can expound on that a little bit. Yes, the goal of the assessor's office is to be as accurate and fair as possible to all taxpayers in the city. But when it comes to corporations, they're calling us in October. They're calling us in September, asking us for our numbers because they're ready to go to court immediately without knowing what the number is. They just automatically assume that most likely it's going to be wrong and they're going to have to fight us. So it's very difficult to mitigate it because they're coming at it from a negative point of view that we never get commercial valuation correct. I've reviewed a lot of these, and so has a couple of other consultants that have been on board for the past year. And I think John Valente and the Safe Ground Analytics team did a very good job at valuing our commercial properties that are based upon income-based strategies.
Great, thank you. I don't see any additional questions, so thank you for that update, and we'll keep moving forward with the reval process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a great month.
You
Great.
too. Thank you.
Moving on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the update from Oak Hills Authority and their audit report. We're going to defer this update until the March meeting. Hopefully at the March meeting, we'll have good news on a possible vendor going into the location at Oak Hills. So we'll defer this update until the March meeting. Which moves us to item 8. Which reads as follows: authorize the purchasing agent to issue a purchase order to GovConnection Inc. in an amount not to exceed $109,646. Let me repeat that: $109,646.89 for a purchase of 790 Microsoft Office 365 annual licenses. GovConnect Inc. is a state of Connecticut contract, number NCPA 01-144, and the account noted. Do we have a motion on this side? Thank you, Councilmember Heather Dunn. And we have with us our Director of IT, Joyce Liu, to provide the narrative for this request.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present this agenda item tonight. I am requesting approval from the Finance and Claim Committee to renew and acquire our Office 365 license for the city employee. Office 365 play an important role in empowering city employee to perform our job effectively, collaboration efficiently, and ensure smooth functioning of our city operation. The license that we are acquiring now, including normal Office like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, email, and this license also including Microsoft Teams, which is a collaboration platform that it will allow a city employee have a video conferencing ability. And then we also have a Microsoft SharePoint. It is a web-based document management platform for the city employee to collaborating on documents. And then we also have Microsoft OneDrive, the Planner, and Microsoft Form. So all those software that will help us to do our daily task. And in this quote, we also have a multiple version, license for the Microsoft Visio. And Visio is a diagram application that we use to create flow chart, diagrams, organization chart, flow plan. And that is really, really useful tool. Like now, IT use a lot, and other departments like DPW, engineer, and they also using that to create diagrams. Including in here, there's a couple license for Microsoft projects. Well, Microsoft Project is a project management software that is used for planning, tracking, managing our projects. And then, well, the last one is Microsoft Power BI. It is analytical tool we use to visualize and analyzing data. It's just shared across the organization. police department, they utilize this to Power BI to allow them to make the data-driven decisions. So this license are crucial for our city employee to efficiently perform their task. So now come to why Microsoft, right? So Microsoft is a sole provider for the Office 365 license. They do not deal with corporate customer directly. So we need to acquire our license from Microsoft authorized contract resellers. Gulf Connection, their quote, attached in this agenda, they have provide us the most competitive quotes for this license. So that's why we put them in this agenda. And this cost will be covered by IT's current year's software operating budget. So IT consistently obtain the license, like every year, a couple of weeks ahead of time, to ensure smooth operation for our employees. Well, when we deal with resellers, they don't want to give us quote more than 30 days. So that's why you are going to see that every year around February, end of January, beginning of February, we are going to have this, we are going to request a quote. So just a heads up, you are going to see this agenda item coming up repeatedly in February every year. Thank you for your attention. Feel free to ask any question or any concern about this purchase.
Thank you. One question I had, I saw that the current, the expiration date is February 29th. Pending this committee approving it and moving it to the full council on Tuesday, February 27th, does that give you enough time to enact a contract before it expires on the 29th?
Yes. Actually, all the license, when we deal with our reseller, as long as we have a PO, they were going to issue the same day purchase, like a license. So now every license is like a cloud subscription base. So it makes it very easy for the license to be deployed to us within a day or a couple hours.
Okay, great. Any questions about this request? Okay, very good. So with that, no questions. I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, show by a raise of hand. And it is unanimous. Thank you. So again, we will move this item to the full council on Tuesday, February 27th for final review and approval. And then we'll have all our licenses in place.
Thank you so much for your time. Have a good evening.
You too. Great. All right, that moves us to item 9, which is to review the recommended fiscal year 2025 operating budget. We have with us Henry Dakowitz. The members of the Finance Committee, you received the presentation at the Common Council meeting on Tuesday. However, we've asked Mr. Dakowitz to walk us through the presentation once again, so that if there's any questions that you might have since you saw it for the first time on Tuesday, this would be the opportunity to kind of bring those questions forward. If there's any item that might need additional research as it relates to your question, we'll be sure to document that and get you the appropriate response. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Dakowitz to take us through the recommended mayor's operating budget.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett. Pleasure to be here to help out Tom Ellis, who couldn't be here this evening. So the agenda for the evening of what we'll cover is the budget process and calendar, the actual recommended operating budget. We'll review some of the numbers on the COVID and ARPA funds, the recommended operating budget, one layer down by department, the unrestricted unassigned fund balance known as the rainy day fund, and a brief conclusion. So here's the calendar, which you've seen for many years. We start by the budget department sending out pro forma budgets to each department in late October. They review them and submit their numbers into our computer system. Then the CFO and budget director sit down with each department to go over their requested budgets. Monday of this week, we had the mayor's recommended budget. Tonight is the finance committee public hearing. In a little less than 2 weeks, the Common Council sets the budget cap, the ceiling, and then the BET has meetings with each of the departments and a public hearing, and they forward a tentative budget to the Common Council March 25th. If their budget is lower than the council cap, then we're sort of done. If they recommend a budget that's higher, the council has to decide to agree or not agree to increase their cap. Ultimately, the council sets the final budget cap April 9th, and then it comes back to the Board of Estimate and Taxation for the final budget and tax levy in early May.
Before
Allocation.
you go forward, did anyone have any questions as it relates to the schedule so that you understand how it's going to flow from this point on? Okay, very good. Thank you, Henry.
Yes. So allocation of local dollars, everyone tends to focus on the top line number. The city local expenditures, the budget for this year, fiscal 25, is 205.9 million. And if you go down below into the top third, the Board of Ed is at 236.8 million. But it's really appropriate to make several adjustments. The city has in-kind services that are performed on behalf of the Board of Ed, but it's in the city's budget. Those would be things like IT, finance department, legal costs. So we round up those numbers, they're filed with the state, and for this coming year, it's approximately 10.2 million. Additionally, the city makes all the payments on debt service. That would be the principal and interest repayments. But there's a certain amount that's segregated for just the public schools. And that amount is 17.4 million this coming year. So really, the local expenditures are not 205, it's 205 minus the 27. The amount of money the city spends on its own operations is $178.3 million. Similarly, on the Board of Ed, it's the same 236, but we add the 27. They are getting the benefit even though it's not in their budget. So the 236, they're really spending 264.4 million. When you look at the total, last year was 400, the current year ending June 30 is 423.7. The recommended for fiscal 25 next year is 442. It's an increase of 19 million or 4.5%. And as Tom Ellis pointed out Monday and Tuesday, it's been pretty consistent with these adjustments that the city's expenditures are about 40% and the Board of Ed's are 60%. Next. This is just a review. We've been showing this slide for several years. So we had FEMA expenses during COVID. So we got $1.7 million for the city for reimbursing some expenses like cleaning office buildings, etc. CRF is the COVID relief fund. It's really the COVID relief money from the federal government that passed through the state of Connecticut. The city got 1.9 million, the Board of Ed got 7.2 million. There was Office of Early Childhood, about 451,000. And then we have the ESSER grants. So the Board of Ed had 11 million and 2 million. ESSER 3 is the identifier for the ARPA money of 24.8 million. So there was a total of almost 38 million for ESSER money for the schools. Secretary of State and CTCL grant, I believe, if I recall, That was to help assure that elections were conducted accurately during COVID, 127,000. And then the city's ARPA money, because Connecticut doesn't have operational counties, we were given 22.1 million as a city, but then in lieu of the county monies that normally would go there, we got an allocation from the state of 17.2 million. So our total was 39.3 million. If I go to the last column, the city took in 43 million of these grants. The Board of Ed had 45, a total of $88 million, which is really significant and very helpful. And the amount that was ARPA was 64 out of that 88. The point is that ARPA is coming to an end. All the monies must be allocated by December 31st of 24. And I believe the city has already allocated the funds for different projects. The actual expenditure of the monies is required by December of 2026. So we have the allocations. The people in charge of the projects know they have to spend the money within 2 years. So I think we're sitting in good shape regarding ARPA money. The negative is it's ending and we're not going to get that this coming year. The mayor's recommended budget. We recommended a Norwalk Public School Board of Ed increase of 10.2 million or 4.5% over last year's approved amount of 226.6 for a total of 236.8. Excuse me, I'm getting over a bad cold. For the city of Norwalk, what the increase is 8.8 million, slightly less than the school's 4.46 over last year's approved 197. The total recommended amount is 205.9. When you add the two together, you're looking at something like 446.5 million. Going into more detail on the city's operating budget, this slide is in size order, decreasing size order from the second column from the left, recommended for 25. So number one was debt service. The numbers went up from 40 to 42.5, an increase of 2.2 million, and the percentage is 5.5%. I'll remind everyone over the last 3-4 years, we've been increasing the amount of money that we borrow. And at the same time, over the last year and a half, the interest rates that we have to pay have gone up. That combination increases our debt service. Public Works came in, they were at 29.6, but they came in with a 3.2% increase over last year by 926,000. Police, again, 3%, a 29.3, 846,000 increase. Employee benefits, we got a break this year with the health insurance and some of the funds in our insurance fund. So the amount recommended for the year is 1.7 million less than last year. The fire department, again, one of the large departments at 23.2 million, again, 3.1%. So the largest city departments came in at or very close to the 3% target the mayor had laid out. Pension plans, it's not that we increased so much as that last year was so terrific that our OPEB was $8 million less than what we had expected. So now the numbers are normalizing. So we have an increase of 2.2 million or 12.4%. Community services, another large department, 10.9 million. The increase is only 482, but on a smaller basis, 4.6%. Economic and community development went up by 313,000, 5.7. Corporate council, 51,000. Contingency, as Tom explained, every 3-4 years when we renegotiate union contracts, while we're in discussions and negotiations with the union, we don't want to explicitly show what we're budgeting. So therefore, we put a certain amount into the contingency account, and ultimately that will be used to fund whatever gets negotiated. And right now, we don't know what that number will be. Grants, 9,000, less than 1%. Chief of Staff, 156,000. This might be the addition of a webmaster. Human Resources, again, 24,000. The rest of the increases are really very modest. So the city alone went from last year, 197 to 2059, an increase of 8.8 million or 4.5%. Board of Ed starts with a larger base. Their number last year was 226.6 million. They have the same 4.5% increase, but that's a bigger increase because of the bigger base of 10.2 million. In total, we're going from 423.7 to 442.6, an increase of a shade under 19 million or 4.5%. Any questions?
Before we move from this slide, Henry,
Yes.
one question I had, when we look at the larger line items, debt service and the pension plans, which are both increasing over $2 million, do we have any wiggle room with those numbers, or are those kind of set numbers that they're kind of baked in?
Well, debt service is the amount of principal and interest payments that are due this coming year. You definitely want to budget exactly, and we do it to the dollar, that says we have enough money in our current budget to pay that. You would never want to under budget that. On the pension plan, frankly, this is how a lot of counties and state governments have gotten into trouble, where they did, we have actuaries who analyze our payroll, the number of people. They make estimates about, okay, let's assume they're going to retire at 65. So we can count on them making contributions for the next several years before they retire. Then we make assumptions about what the investment rates will be that we earn on those monies. And the actuaries are sophisticated mathematicians, and they come up with a recommended pension contribution. Historically, over the last 10, 15 years, there are quite a number of counties and states that did not contribute the recommended amount by the actuaries. And what happens is you're putting less into the fund. That smaller amount earns less than what you anticipate. And now the gap between what your assets are valued at and what you owe from a liability to pay out those people when they retire grows larger and larger. So the city has always had a conservative philosophy that says, we're going to fund whatever the actuaries tell us. Now, circumstances can change. If we do better on our investment returns, then next year, maybe we need less of a contribution. It also depends on our census. What is the age? When we had an early retirement offer during COVID, and quite a number of people took it, we had fewer people contributing versus what they originally planned, and they were taking out money earlier. So subsequent to that early retirement plan, we had to contribute more to make sure the pension plan was still on target to be fully funded. I think it's in 17 years. So again, some governments have tried to under invest in pension plans. Norwalk, I think wisely and conservatively, just says, let's take that number that we have to put in there. It goes in July 1st, so we get credit for the investments for the whole year. And that is why our pension plans, we have 4 of them, are 75% funded. And our OPEB, the post-retirement employee benefits, which is mostly health insurance, the last I looked, we were 97% funded. Much better than many cities. It's just one less headache. And also the rating agencies view that very favorably compared to everyone else.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Before we move off the slide, any questions?
Just one.
Yes, sure.
Thanks, Mr. Dakowitz. One quick question. So in budgeting for the debt service, were there any significant financial constraints needed to be imposed in order to kind of help maintain our AAA bond rating?
Could you repeat that? I'm not sure I heard it all.
So in budgeting for our debt service, were there any significant or specific financial constraints that were needed to be imposed to help maintain our healthy AAA bond rating?
I think that to maintain the bond rating of AAA, you definitely want to budget for the whole amount that has to go in. And literally, we can budget to the dollar. We look at all the debt we have outstanding. We know the interest rate we pay on each layer of debt. And we have a certain amount of interest and a certain amount of principal that will be repaid. The financial advisor runs those numbers for us, and that's the number we put in. So in my mind, it's going up because we have capital projects that we need to fund and we need to borrow the money for that. And unfortunately, I don't have to tell everyone here, over the last 2, 3 years, the interest rates throughout society, but including municipal tax-free bond rates, has gone up. We work aggressively with our investment bankers to get the most competitive rates and to figure out how much we should be borrowing. But that number, I don't look at it as a constraint. I just look at it as a mandatory. That's where we are. The only way that will come down is if we have bonds that are maturing every year. If we end up borrowing less than the amount that matures, the amount of absolute debt outstanding would go down. And the second thing would be if interest rates come down.
Got it. So does that imply possibly kind of, having less capital infrastructure projects or
Well,
is that really not really,
I've talked about this for several years. One of the big challenges the city has is that we have, I forget what the actual number is today, 175 or 200 million of approved capital projects, which we have not yet bonded. Okay. And the reason we do that is because of IRS rules. It would have been great when I borrowed at 1.75% to borrow 300 million and stick it in a bank. The IRS doesn't allow you to do it. So we look at our cash flows. And so we borrow based on the cash flow needs. I want to make sure I have enough for the project managers when they have invoices, but at the same time, not too much to exceed the IRS requirements. Having said that, we did undertake last year a review of all the open projects, those historical projects. And when you say cut back on projects, that's one thing that might be able to be done. But right now, it's a big challenge for the city.
all right, thank you so much, Mr. Dagovich.
You're welcome. Greg, did I say that right, or would you say it differently?
No, you read the script.
Okay, thank
I
you.
think, Councilmember Freya has a question.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you, Henry. On the pension, you mentioned that that's 4 separate funds and running from funded from as low as 75 up to 97%.
No, I'm sorry. Excuse me for interrupting. The 4 pension funds are
Yeah.
about 75% funded. The OPEB for post-retirement health is 97.
Okay.
And for I'm sorry. Did you want me to
Okay.
in the 4 funds?
No, I think I know where I'm standing now. So 75% is the number that I was looking for. How does that rate with other municipalities as far as how much they've funded?
I would say, based on the feedback we got from rating agencies, that 75% funded for pensions is probably in the top 20% across the country. Meaning it's a good thing and it's more conservative. The OPEB, we're probably in the top 3%.
Right. So if we were to be less conservative and still not, or let me put it another way, could we be less conservative and still not get ourselves into that ever deepening hole of trying to make up in future years what we've not contributed this year? Is there a possibility that we could do something along those lines?
I'm really not the expert. I think our financial advisor, who's been advising the city for over 20 years and is very close to all the rating agencies, would be the best one to advise. Can you cut back a little bit? What would that mean? What would that imply? He's the one who has given us guidance on funding pensions, OPEB, debt service, and the rainy day fund. And some of it is science, but some of it is art. And so we have capital, we have debt outstanding, and we once did an analysis looking at the amount of debt outstanding for AAA and AA credits in Connecticut. And he increased it, I believe, to 500 million as our limit. And I believe currently we're at 450. So that's something that's going close. The second big ratio is the ratio of the debt service that's in the budget, that top number, and comparing it to the total expenditures of our budget. And he found that the AAA credits usually had no more than 10% as that ratio. So the debt service is going up, but the budget goes up every year. So we've been in the 9.5 to 9.8% range.
Right.
So those are things that the rating agency might look carefully at. At the same time, they look at our rainy day fund. They look at our cash on hand. They look at our surplus every year. And they look at those things very favorably, and then they pull it all together into an overall rating.
Okay. Do we have, last question, do we have any idea what kind of a surplus we're going to look at this year?
I'm not privy, I'm not close to it anymore day to day. The budget department, usually starting after the December results, 6 months in, looks at
Right.
budget versus actual and looks at the numbers. But I would just say historically, during my 5 years, we've always run a surplus, and we often did not need to draw down the rainy day fund that we planned. So
Right.
somehow the managers, and often that's because we have vacancies. So we fully fund those vacant positions, and maybe they don't get filled, or maybe they get filled halfway through the year. So there's a save that's built in. So those saves tend to offset some of the other things, and that's how it all works together. But I would suspect, I haven't heard anything that would indicate that we might be running at a deficit.
I'm sorry, what was the last thing? What did you?
I haven't heard anything that suggests that in fiscal year 24 that we would run a deficit. I haven't heard anything like that.
Yeah, I'm not, well, I am definitely concerned if it was a deficit, but I'd love to see a surplus.
Wouldn't we all?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Slide. So these are the major drivers. Employee benefits and insurance was a positive decline in expense by 1.7 million because of health insurance and workers' comp. The debt service went up by 2.3 and the pensions went up by 2.2. So that's what Tom had listed as the major drivers, because as you saw, with most of the other departments, they're coming in at around the 3%. And if not, it was on a very small department, so the dollar amount of the increase was rather immaterial. Here we look at the rainy day fund. And again, as I said, the ratios that are normally examined is comparing the rainy day fund to the total expenditures. So on the top line, we have our total expenditures. Unrestricted, unassigned at year end, 69. It went down to 58 because the auditors that year said that when we budget a drawdown of rainy day fund, it can't stay in unassigned. So that's why it went down to 58, and then it went up to 72, 74, 78. 72 and 66, the expectation is that this year we're drawing down $6 million. That's why the 78.8 goes down to 72.8. And this coming year, 25, we're planning another 6 million drawdown. So assuming nothing else changes, the 72 would go to 66. It doesn't include, going back to Mr. Freyer's point, if we had a surplus in 24, that would offset one of those declines, that our general fund balance would be a little bit higher. Looking at the rainy day fund as a percentage of expenditures, it's ranged from 20 down to 15. As a CFO, I would say you never have too much rainy day fund, and the rating agencies really look favorably because they're trying to figure out what is the risk of the people who buy the bonds not getting paid. And when they see 15% sitting on the balance sheet, in an emergency, we could just tap into that and pay the debt holders. They view that very favorably. Questions? No?
Yeah, yes, if we can go back to, looking historically since 2019, if we go forward with the recommended drawdown, that percentage will be the lowest it's been since 2019. Any cause for concern with that number, the 15.1%?
Well, it's interesting because our city policy is that the rainy day fund should be between 7.5% and 15%. That certainly was established before I got here. So we're happy to comply at 15%. But again, if the managers are managing well and they generate some surplus, we feel, there's so many negatives out there that this is one of our real pillars. The other one is the pension and OPEB funding. And when we go to the rating agencies, we're able to highlight, yes, we may have challenges, but look at this bulletproof balance sheet. I would not be concerned with the 15.1 because it's 2 years away. It would mean that we draw down the whole 6 million this year with no surplus because we had a balanced budget, and we drew down next year's 6 million. So I think we're in the healthy range between 15 and 20 at about 17 and a half. And so far, so good with the rating agencies and balancing everything we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So in conclusion, we believe this is balanced, fair, shows some fiscal restraint, and that's the mayor's recommended budget. Thank you, Agnes, for turning the slides.
Great, thank you. Any questions as it relates? Again, this is the, I'll say the initial pass of the mayor's recommended operating budget. Additional thoughts are taking place now as it relates to the operating budget, as the mayor indicated at the beginning of the public hearing. There could be potential changes to what we're seeing right now, and we'll receive those changes from the mayor's office as soon as possible. But this is the foundation. This is the start. So more to come, but this is the launch in terms of where we're at right now with our operating budget.
Can I ask one question? When we were talking the other day, the mayor indicated that, or Tom had indicated that there was 18 headcount additions that were not going to be filled. Are those numbers that we just looked at include the 18 or have not been deducted from the budget number yet?
It's my understanding that what has been presented to us in this proposed budget does not include actually it's a total of 19 positions that were initially submitted as part of the budget request from the departments. And I believe, is there a total number amount? Was 19, but is there a dollar amount associated on that spreadsheet?
Per department with how many they currently have and how many.
It just has a total amount, yeah. I believe, I thought Tom Ellis might have mentioned the associated dollar amount with the 19 in the presentation. Maybe I'm missing that, but to answer your question, the
Some of them do have August.
Some of them have the details.
Some of them do. So like this one.
yeah, there's some
Some of them
numbers.
do, but some of them is just a general overview. So
So
there's
he
two.
didn't
I mean, you
total,
could-
right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah, he didn't total the.
So my question really is that the 442 number does not include any headcount addition.
That is, so.
I would clarify, Agnes is the expert since she came here, and she maintains the rosters and reconciles them with human resources and the controller shop. So what happens is, at the end of any year, when we start a new budget, we have a roster. We have all the people who are on the payroll and authorized vacancies, meaning it's been funded,
right,
but no one's in that position yet. And what happens is when we go through the budget, just like people request expense money, they request positions. So they're not the vacancies, they're new positions to be added. And every year, what happens is a certain number are requested, and usually a smaller number is approved. And the number that is approved, when I say approved, it's approved in the mayor's recommended, and then the council does their thing and the BET does their thing. In this year, it sounds like 19 were requested, and the mayor decided that his recommendation would include 0. Agnes, did I get that right?
She's nodding her head yes.
Said yes, she's not.
Okay. I think I got it right.
Yes, yes, yeah, sorry, I was muted.
Just
Okay.
nod. Okay,
She's in the aquarium. It's a little bit of an echo.
okay, I understand.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for the time.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Henry.
Welcome.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so with that, we'll move the motion to adjourn. Councilmember Heather Dunn, thank you. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you for your time and effort and involvement, and we'll move forward from here. Thank you. We stand adjourned.
Have a good night.